All right, how's it going, everybody? Awesome. All right, that's the right answer. I always hate it when I say, how's it going, everybody? And they either say nothing or they go, meh, or awful. My cat just died, yay. All right. Anyway, welcome to Scrum Under a Waterfall. Hopefully your day is going well. I am Benjamin Day. And before I get going, I just want to take a poll of the room. How many of you have heard of Scrum.org? Awesome. How many of you have heard of Scrum.org because of me? Okay. Cool. That is good. It's getting better. All right. My name is Benjamin Day. I'm based out of Boston, or Brookline, Massachusetts, if you actually know. I'm a Visual Studio ALM MVP, do all kinds of Scrum, Team Foundation Server kind of stuff, architecture coaching, project coaching. I've got a couple classes up on Pluralsight. I got my website, email address, and my Twitter account. Feel free to ping me, ask questions, whatever. I guess you've already done this slide. Why are we going that way? All right, so Scrum.org has a couple different classes. I teach two of them. So Scrum Developer and Professional Scrum Foundation. So if you're interested in getting training on those, let me know. Then I've got the courses, ALM with 2012 Fundamentals, and then ALM for Developers with Visual Studio 2012. And I've got a load testing course that is coming soon. Some introductory thoughts. Oh, having some trouble with the clicker. Okay. I'm going to talk a lot about Waterfall. I'm going to say that word a lot. And when I say Waterfall, I'm thinking plan-driven. So you've got Gantt charts, Microsoft projects, start and end dates, all that kind of stuff. Distinct phases of delivery. Okay? Now, Scrum Under Waterfall, I'm thinking of a combination of Scrum or some other agile process plus a plan-driven approach. And I'm going to abbreviate it, SUW, on my slides from here on out. And I've got a handful of assumptions. First off, Scrum Under Waterfall, I'm going to say exists. So hopefully we can settle on that. The next thing I want to settle on is that the value of Agile and Scrum has pretty much been proved. It's settled. It's a good thing. Okay? Moving on. Hopefully that wasn't too controversial. I didn't hear any gasps. Okay. All right, so Agile is really popular. Dave West, Forrester Research, did some study, and he's seeing that it's the most, Agile is one of the most popular things, and amongst that, Scrum is one of the most popular. Scrum is definitely the dominant flavor of Agile if you're going off and doing that stuff. And what's really important is that Agile seems to get some results. So if we look on the left-hand side, the graph is for Waterfall, right-hand side is for Agile. And we've got that 29% on the Waterfall side, which is failed projects. That is not good. Failed projects never deliver anything, and they get canceled. So looking at the difference in style, so only 9% in the Agile world has a completely failed project. And then that number of successful projects is much, much better. We're hopefully aiming for successful projects, right? And then the challenge projects are about the same. So Agile seems to do pretty well. Now, my 2 cents on this is that Agile is not, Scrum Under Waterfall is not a fantastic place to be. It's going to be a transitional form. So the industry is generally going towards a more Agile and a Scrum approach to stuff, and there's lots and lots of companies out there that are doing Waterfall. The way that I'm going to approach this in this talk today is that you're going to be sort of thinking about Scrum Under Waterfall as someplace you don't really want to hang out in for years and years and years. You don't want to stay there indefinitely. Now, I'd like to talk about a quote from a leading project management expert. You can drive with your feet, doesn't mean it's a good idea. Now, it's slightly cleaned up for general audience. You probably can remember what the actual thing was, and don't quote me out loud. This is kind of what I'm thinking about with Scrum Under a Waterfall. You can do it. People deliver software with it all the time, but it's not necessarily such a fantastic idea because there's an awful lot of overhead to it. So, what do you do if your company is doing Scrum Under Waterfall? I mean, how many of you are doing Scrum Under Waterfall right now? That's virtually everybody. Let's flip that around. Anyone not doing Scrum Under Waterfall? So for those people that raise their hand on that second part, is it just that we don't have any process whatsoever? Waterfall is way too heavy, and Scrum, well, we don't have the discipline to do Scrum, so we just decided that we're going to do away with process altogether. Yay! Fantastic. All right, so if your company is doing Scrum under a waterfall, you have two options. You can either quit and protest and get a new job, which, how many of your bosses are in the room with you? Okay, not too many. Job market's pretty good for software developers right now. This is a viable option. You don't have to work at a company that does Scrum under a waterfall. You could go to a company that's doing full agile. Vote with your feet. I think it's actually a little bit more fun to not quit and actually try to make it work. So you could be the hero that goes in and tries to help the organization make that change to become more agile. Help them save money, help them deliver on time, help them deliver a higher quality product on the first try. Help them make informed decisions. So thinking about trying to make it work also is like, I'm going to bet that most of you don't show up at work just as a volunteer. You do it for money. And my thing is running. Is my mic still on? Okay. You do software for money, and, well, that money comes from somewhere. And that's because someone is making money off the software you make, and therefore they pay you. So, well, option number 2. If you like money, that's the way to go. Maybe not true. So my goal in this talk is, well, by nature, I'm extremely practical. So I'm always trying to see both people's sides on what's going on. And, well, it's really important to acknowledge that change takes time. You are not going to return from TechEd and in the first week be like, hey, I heard from Ben Day that Scrum under Waterfall is not a great place to be, and he put a crisp rock picture up, and let's change this week. Right? Not going to happen. It's going to take time. You're going to have to chip away at it to change that culture. All right, so let's talk about some comparisons and motivations between both sides. So I'm going to go really fast through this. The slides are up on the TechEd site. I'm going to post them on my blog as well, so you can go through these at your leisure. But some of the big ones that are on here is that how you think about requirements. So in Waterfall world, you probably have very firm requirements. They're written down, and the idea is you're trying to get certainty about what you do. In Scrum or Agile, you're kind of embracing the fact that you're not going to know everything that's going on before you start. So we're doing more informal requirements that are based on communication with your customer or your stakeholders, which goes to the second one. Waterfall kind of has this mindset that here's the requirements document, don't talk to me. Right? Does that sound familiar? Just deliver it. I gave you the requirements document. I signed off on it. Just build what's in that doc. Well, it doesn't necessarily work. And on the Scrum Agile side, we're anticipating that we're going to talk to our customers or our stakeholders fairly often. Here, what do you think about this? Hate it. What do you think about this? Still hate it. What do you think about this? Meh. What about you change this? So some sort of a communication, some sort of a collaborative approach. Waterfall is going to think that you can plan it from start to finish. Maybe you can. In Scrum Agile, you've got a product backlog that has the highest priority things at the top, lowest priority stuff on the bottom, and that priority of things that are on the product backlog can change all the time, so the composition of the product backlog changes all the time. That means what you're going to deliver next might change sprint over sprint. So you're changing a lot of what's going on. Waterfall, thinking about assigned tasks. In Scrum Agile, get ready to gasp. Can I get a gasp when I say this? In Scrum and Agile, assigned tasks are considered a bottleneck. Yeah. It's always such a feeling of power to be on stage and get the audience to do a gasp like that. So assigned tasks are considered a bottleneck because it breaks the self-organization of the team. So if everyone's just kind of like, okay, what's up next? All right, I'll take that one. I'll take that one. As opposed to, at the beginning, assigning everybody tasks, and then they're kind of thinking, well, I don't have to touch that because that is Bob's task. That's the DBA's problem. That is not my problem. You start to just spend a lot of time waiting as opposed to just swarming on the problem and trying to get stuff done. You got some differences about team size, big thoughts about when you actually deliver software. So in Waterfall, you're going to go for potentially a long time before you actually deliver some working software. In Scrum and Agile, you're delivering working software at the end of your sprint. So a sprint is a maximum of 30 days. Maybe you're doing 3 weeks, maybe you're doing 2 weeks, but at the end of that sprint, working software always. And if you aren't delivering working software, you notice that and you adjust accordingly. Which goes into the next one. Waterfall is pretty resistant to change. Change is considered a defect in Waterfall. Would you agree with me? Yeah. So if something goes wrong and schedule starts to slip, people start getting grumpy about that. Or if the requirements change, it's like, oh, we didn't get our requirements right the first time. Ah. Well, in Scrum and Agile, we're just kind of assuming that we're going to find out stuff as we go along. Software is complex, right? Thinking about all the times that you've gotten in and started, I understand how I'm going to build this feature all the way through. You start coding, you write like 15 lines of code, and you're like, didn't think about that, right? And now everything is completely different. That's why schedules slip. Is that once you get into it, you have a different understanding of what you're trying to do. So in Scrum and Agile, you're expecting that change is going to happen. Waterfall tends to be a little bit more contractual. Here's a requirements document, go build it. Scrum, Agile, if you do a contract, it looks a lot more like time and expenses. Okay. Now, going back to the research materials that say that Waterfall is bogus, not that I have an opinion, why does anyone actually do it? Well, you got to admit it feels pretty natural, right? You got those start and end dates, and you think, well, of course we do this, then we do this, then we do this, and just estimate it, and we've got the dates, and we're good. We've got the plan. We know what we're going to do. Now all we have to go out is just go out and do it, right? So that's part of it. Feels really good. Gives us a sense of control. And what's really important is that it helps managers manage. They need a reason to exist. So with Waterfall, you're trying to pin down, you can tweet that if you want to, @BenDay on Twitter. So you're going to try to pin down what's going to be built, and the idea here is you're going to try to minimize uncertainty. Sounds good, feels really good. Now, on the other side, the Scrum Agile world, we're embracing the uncertainty we have. It's based on empirical measurements and empirical data over years of software development. Stuff changes. We can't pin it down. We cannot know what's going to happen. Something always changes. Now, here's a tip for you for going back to your Scrum Agile teams. How many of you, at the end of your sprint planning meeting, say, well, the team is committing to deliver ABC? Raise your hand if you say commit. Okay. Try to start saying forecast instead. Now, the reason I say this is, think about your TV news. Turn on your TV news, and you've got the weather report that comes on. What's that person who delivers the weather report called? Weather committer? No. So it's a weather forecaster. That person's doing his or her best attempt at nailing the forecast. So if that person says, yep, it's going to be sunny on Saturday, and it turns out to be pouring on Saturday, do you show up at that guy's house and say, where's your sense of commitment, dude? Same thing happens here. So what I'm going to talk about throughout this session is that there are little things that you can do to help the communication between you and the Waterfall side of the house and you and your managers, and that's one of them. Forecast versus commitment. Because commitment has that overload to it. It says you lack commitment if you don't make your commitments. Versus not making your forecast, it's like, well, forecast has some wiggle room that's baked into it. All right. Scrum Agile also is self-organization and estimation by the doers, as opposed to someone says, I think it's going to take 8 hours. And you're like, I think it's going to take 50. 8 it is. Right? So another thing to think about is, who is Waterfall actually for? And when I think about my customers, have you ever seen a company that's Agile at the top and Waterfall at the bottom? Never. That's a slam dunk that Waterfall is for managers. Now start thinking about other stuff. Do your managers trust your team? No, because they think we're idiots. And what do the team think about the managers? Not a heck of a lot better. All right. So Waterfall versus Agile. So the Waterfall people think that we in the Agile community are just a bunch of sandal-wearing anarchists. Right? Long hair, it's braided, we smell bad. It's probably true. And they're thinking that our estimates are always terrible, which they are, and that we're always late. Maybe. More importantly, they think that we're lazy. They think that their plan is flawless, and if we just followed their plan, and if we didn't write terrible code and just do bugs, everything would have been fantastic. So their plan was awesome. It's the developers that screwed it up. But they're probably thinking, as they're looking at the work in front of them, is this work is too complex to not have a plan. How can we possibly go from point A to point Z and deliver this thing without knowing how we're going to do it? And to be honest, when I first started doing Scrum and Agile, that was exactly what I thought. I was like, this is the dumbest thing I've ever seen in my life. Now, flipping that around, we on the Agile side are thinking about the Waterfall people. The plan is largely voluntold. Does anyone know what the voluntold word means? Yeah, okay. So I had a friend who was in the Navy for 9-10 years, and this was just before Iraq War was kicking off, and one of his commanding officers came in and was like, we need a bunch of people that are going to go to Iraq. Now, he joined the Navy to hang out on ships. They want him to go on the ground in Iraq. He's like, don't want to. And he's like, well, we need 8 volunteers. And implied in that is that if they don't volunteer, they're going to volunteer for you. It's like, I need 8 volunteers. No one? You're volunteered, and you're volunteered, and you're volunteered, and you're volunteered, and you're volunteered. Have fun in Iraq. That is voluntold. Now, our estimates are frequently voluntold when we work in a waterfall environment. That thing that I said before, it's like, how long do you think this is going to take? You have 8 hours. And you say, I think it's going to take 80, maybe more. And what we're basically, and then they say, that's nice, 8 hours. A lot of wiggle room. It's really helpful. That plan is imposed. We're like, we don't think that that's accurate, and yet we're being told that that's accurate. So when it ends up being late and we miss our forecast, surprise, surprise. All right. And some of the problem there is that when we're being asked to estimate something, we frequently don't have anything real to look at anyway. So we either pad it or we just take just a complete wild guess. And our thought on this is that, well, this is too complex to not plan. Because once we get into it, we're not going to know what we're doing anymore. Which is a little scary to the waterfall people that want it to be pinned down nicely. So point of agreement number 1, both sides think that the other is wrong. Point of agreement number 2, the work is complex. That's important to point out. We have agreement on complexity. So let's think about how we're going to make this work. So Scrum under Waterfall is the grumpy marriage of 2 processes. Now, I'm sort of thinking about my grandparents. They were married for like 800 years, and they hated each other. Scrum under Waterfall. So why would Scrum under Waterfall be happening? One might be a contract. Maybe it's required by law. I mean, I know a lot of government contractors have to use it for whatever reason. Maybe you're the Agile experiment, and it's an Agile experiment, and they're like, we're not going to let them run too far, so we're going to rope them in with a project plan. Perfect. Or maybe just because. Maybe you're, the person who owns the company is like, I love Microsoft Project. Yeah. Could happen. It could happen. There's treatments for that, but, whatever. All right, so what we're going to do in Scrum under Waterfall is we're going to try to make it work, and we're going to leverage the strengths of each. So Scrum for your day-to-day activities, you're going to detect your problems with sprints. So remember, the sprints are the boundaries within which you will work, so 30 days or less. And you're going to focus on definition of done, DOD, and working software. How many of you have a written definition of done? That is not enough. Definition of done is about as close as you're ever going to get to a silver bullet in software development. Okay? Now, what you're going to do is you're going to think about everything that goes into making a feature or requirement done. And it's not just the development part. There's a lot that happens after you check in your code, just in case you wondered. It might get QA'd. It might have to go to some sort of, DBA review. There's operations stuff. There's hardware. There's deployment. There's all kinds of stuff. All those things go into your definition of done. So developers tend to have this habit of looking at the stuff that's in front of them and saying, yeah, it's going to take me about 2 weeks to code it. But then there's like another 2 weeks of QA, and then there's bug fixes that might come through, and yada, 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 and yada, yada, yada. All that stuff has to be written down, and that becomes your definition of done. Now, if you have that shared definition of done that can be shared amongst everybody that participates in the software development process, you can all start getting a lot better about your estimates. Now, that definition of done, when you deliver code at the end of the sprint, it has to meet your definition of done. Your definition of done equals working software. So, you're going to use those sprints and definition of done to keep you honest. How many of you think you have some massive technical debt at your companies? Everybody. Definition of done would help you out with that technical debt, because it's always like that little thing like, oh, we don't need unit tests this time, right? Or, oh, whatever, we don't need a deployment script right now. We're too busy. Or whatever, just log into the SQL Server and deploy the tables manually. No, bad software developer. Focus on definition of done. If your definition of done says deployment script, it needs a deployment script. If it needs unit tests with 75% code coverage or greater, if you don't have that, it's not done. You can't ship it. Because if you relax your definition of done, it's technical debt. So on Waterfall is actually pretty good for multi-team coordination. So Scrum does pretty good if you've got a small number of teams that have to coordinate with each other. But when it starts to get large, Waterfall starts to become kind of handy. It's nice to be able to see how they all roll up into a project plan, especially if all those things have to ship at once. So Waterfall also for release planning. So the differences here, so for a Scrum Agile team, your backlog is going to be pretty much your project plan that was going to come down from Waterfall people. You're probably going to have a lot less emphasis on backlog grooming and sprint planning because you're just going to work it down that project plan. It's going to be a lot less scope negotiation during the sprints because you're going to probably have a little bit more requirements than you'd typically see on a straight-up Agile Scrum team. And then stuff that's going to be also changing is there's going to be that focus on done. There's going to be the daily. Actually, I got this completely swapped. It's supposed to be changed on the left and same on the right. So you're still going to have a definite focus on definition of done. You're still going to have your daily Scrum meeting. So a daily Scrum meeting helps you figure out what you're going to do in the next 24 hours. It's an opportunity to every day inspect and adapt to see how you're doing on delivering software for that sprint. You're going to have a sprint burn down chart that's going to help you see, are we on target for remaining work? You're going to have a sprint review meeting at the end. This is super important. You demo your software to anyone who cares to show up, your stakeholders. And if it doesn't meet the definition of done, you can't show it. And then finally, you're going to have your retrospective meetings. And now the retrospective meetings are the cure of all ills. So if something is going wrong or if something is going right, you're going to do more of the good stuff, less of the bad stuff. But you're going to discuss what you did and how you did inside that sprint. Now remember, your sprint is 30 days or less. Way different than in a waterfall project where you might have a 6-month deliverable and you're like, okay, everything's going great. And then you get up to like 5.5 weeks of that 5.5 months of your 6-month release. Everything's been going great, and then you're like, you start looking in on where you're at, and you're like, oh man, we're totally behind. Does that sound familiar? You're perfectly on target until you're not, and then you're really not on time. It goes from like right on time, right on time, right on time, right on time, 6 months late. So that sprint review meeting and the sprints are really going to help you to, like, at least every 30 days, stop and take a look. Are we on track or not? Are we lying to ourselves or not? Okay. Some of the risks of Scrum under Waterfall. Impedance mismatch because of poor communication. So I had that chart showing Waterfall on the left and Scrum Agile on the right. People just don't think the same. You have to work through that. You have to work through that you just don't think about the same stuff and you don't have necessarily the same values. You've got to remember that, and you have to work on communication between the two sides. So take a moment to just read this cartoon. Does this sound familiar? Now, for those of you that are developers or QA people or whatever, not management, how many times have you done this before? Yeah, right. This is kind of in the voluntold zone. This is definitely us as developers not being honest. Okay? So if we tell our boss, let's assume that the evil boss is not evil. Let's assume that that person is actually trying to do a good job. If we lie to them and say, yep, it's doing awesome, they're going to go off and they're going to make moves and decisions in the business, assuming that it's awesome. Was it awesome? No. It's late. So now they're executing on bad data. So you got to work on trust and transparency. So however you do it, your bosses have to trust you. You have to trust your boss. You have to be honest with them about where you're actually at, delivery-wise. Now, a big problem is a culture of fear. How many of you sort of work in a culture of fear? Yeah, good. And the rest of you are probably lying. Complete detachment from reality. Okay. So the problem with the culture of fear is that no one talks about what's going on, so you're completely detached from what's actually happening. So there's no reality at your company. And then you run into that problem of everything is going great until it isn't. So you're on time, 6 months late. You don't want to do that. So, and part of the problem is you have two sets of books. The Waterfall people have their little Waterfall project plan. It's got the dates on it. You keep saying, yep, the dates are great. And on your Agile side, you've got a burn down chart or whatever that's saying, we are eating it. And you don't tell anybody because, well, your boss is evil and you're afraid of him or her. So that's two sets of books. Now, I'm eventually going to do some demos of Project Server and Team Foundation Server. That gets you to one set of books. So you record your status in Team Foundation Server, it replicates into Project Server, which replicates into the project plan, and vice versa. One set of books that is being captured dispassionately and just the facts. Okay? So you got to work on that two sets of books problem. Another one is using metrics for evil. This is part of the culture of fear. So let's say you got the burn down chart, right? So the burn down chart is showing you how many hours are remaining in your sprint. And you've got that black line, which is your ideal trend. So basically, it just draws a diagonal, like if everything is wonderful, we're going to do like this. Now, no one's burn down chart looks like this. Like, it's always above that black line, right? And you're always working on it. You're trying to figure out, okay, how do we bring this in? Well, let's say that you have a evil boss who is looking at your burn down chart a lot, and they're a little bit type A, okay? So they see that you're above the trend line, and they start to freak out. And they come up to you, and they're like, why are you late? Why is that? Do something. Fix this. And they come in, and they yell at you on a daily basis every time it's late. What are you going to do? I know what I'd do. I'd find a way to put 8 hours in every single day, and that thing would hug that line all the way down. Is it accurate? No. Lying. So if you have that culture of fear and people are beating on you to make sure that the metrics look good, that now means that the metrics are useless. So you got to work on that. Another thing that I think is kind of funny is that a lot of organizations are obsessed with individual performance, so they capture a lot of metrics in Team Foundation Server or whatever about individual bugs related to individual developers and like all kinds of stuff like that. How fast are you burning down your tasks or whatever? I would say don't do that. That's just capturing data that's going to get into trouble. Now, ostensibly, they always say, well, we need it for performance reviews. No, you don't. On your teams, I'm sure this person is not here, but on your teams, do you know who sucks? Yeah, you didn't need TFS or any other metrics to tell you who sucks on your team. So don't capture that data. Don't go nuts trying to figure out individual performance. That's just going to get you into trouble. Another one to work on is the show it to me when it's done thing. If you've got a stakeholder, it's like, just don't get out of my office. Show it to me when it's finished. That's a recipe for delivering exactly the wrong piece of software on time and on budget. Okay? You got to work on that too. That's another cultural thing. So let's think about how we're actually going to make it work. And I've got 5 tips. First off, we're going to think positive. We're going to come to terms with uncertainty, embrace the fact that fear is everywhere, get rid of earned value, and then we're going to avoid keeping 2 sets of books. So, number 1, thinking positive. When your organization starts to go Scrum or Agile, people start to freak out. Developers freak out, testers freak out, managers freak out, executives freak out, everybody freaks out. Everybody gets really weird as you start going more Agile. One of the problems is that, well, Agile methodologies tend to make people have to think. Okay? How many of you like thinking? None. Like none. Another one, and this is the important one, fear is important, fear of loss. Humans are obsessed with loss. If there's something where it's like 95% chance of gain versus a 5% chance of loss, humans, again and again, will focus on that loss, that potential loss, instead of the potential gain. This is something you have to sort of work on in selling Agile and Scrum to people that are a little bit freaked out about management. So you're going to focus on what you gain rather than what you lose going Agile. So one of the things you're gaining is focusing on done software. At the end of our sprint, at the end of our 30-day window, we're going to have done software. That's good, right? So you're delivering more often. I already said that. One of the things you have to do is get past change being a bug. This is another one of these cultural things. Instead of change being an indication that something went wrong, like if you deliver the wrong software and the stakeholders are like, I kind of want it like this, you're going to think of it as it's a chance to adapt. So, all right, we delivered done working software. It wasn't exactly what we needed, but we're going to adapt, and this time around we're going to go back and we're going to change it to be what you want. We're going to change it so that it's not rework, it's actually improving existing features to better meet the needs of the stakeholders. So it's little subtle things where you're turning it around, and instead of approaching it from a negative frame, you're approaching it from a positive frame. Now, I've been doing software development for a long time, and I naturally say no. Can you do this in the next couple days? No. Can you do this? No. Don't ask. No. Okay? Does that sound familiar? Part of it is this fear, like, I don't want to be accountable for this. If I can't make it, it's like I'm going to get spanked. That's bad. Right? So it's sort of something that we all have to work on as team members. We have to kind of take a deep breath and say, okay, how do I turn this around to be positive instead of negative? And if you start listening to yourself, you're going to hear yourself being negative a lot. So you start practicing being more positive, and you're going to get better results. This is what your executives are going to want to hear. This is what your project managers are going to want to hear. And it's a matter of talking about what we can do versus what we can't do. It's like, well, we're going to be a little bit late, but can we adjust it this way? Because then we'll actually meet it. So conversations like that are pretty helpful if you stay positive. Use the sprint boundaries as an opportunity to look at where you're at. So 30 days, done software, where are we actually at? Let's take a pause, let's look at what's going on. Now, how many of you have ever heard of Karl von Clausewitz? Not too many. Okay, so he was a Prussian smarty pants in the Prussian army back in the mid-1800s, and he wrote this book called On War. Now, I read a bunch of it, and it actually applies to software fairly well. And one of his things that he talks about is that strategy is the use of the engagement for the purpose of the war. So what he was trying to encourage the generals in the army to do is when you have a battle, don't high-five yourself to death. Like, yeah, we won. Take a step back and think about, okay, now we have won. How do we use this on our next battle so that we actually achieve the war? So instead of thinking of it as just a bunch of individual battles, think of it as a bunch of battles that have a point. So you have a bunch of sprints. You're delivering working software that's going in a direction of the ultimate direction of shipping that product. But you're going to have to pause every once in a while and be a little introspective about where you're actually at. Use that information, pass it into your strategy for the next sprint and the subsequent sprint and for backlog grooming and all this other stuff. Next tip, come to terms with uncertainty. Software is not a sure thing, and wishing that it were is not going to make it so. Gripping tighter also does not make it so. So how many of you have project managers who just go, it's the white knuckle school of software project management, right? It's just like driving on ice and snow in the winter. They're just gripping super tight so that their knuckles are going to pop open. That's not a good way to run a software project. So you have to kind of calm them down and get through that. So because software is always getting more complex once you begin. So help them embrace the fact that change is going to happen. Okay? And then it's a good thing. Now, A lot of times you have that kind of project manager. It's like spend a lot of time working on requirements to pin it down so that you are not wrong. So what you will frequently find is that you get to pretty good requirements almost instantly. So maybe in the course of a day or 2 days, you got great requirements and now you're good enough to go. Or you could spend another 8 days after that, and maybe you get a little bit better on your estimate. Now, in that extra days, where you got just a tiny bit better on your estimate, you could have spent that 8 days actually working on the software, right? So it's a lot more efficient sometimes to sort of say, okay, well, this planning is wasteful. Let's get into actually delivering software. It's good enough. We will talk to you. We will talk to the stakeholders. We will get it right by collaboration, as opposed to trying to get our estimates right and our requirements documents nailed down perfectly. So you're going to get to good enough requirements and then stop. Number 3, fear is everywhere. So how many of you are managers? Okay, your developers are afraid of you. Now, how many of you are executives? A handful of you. Your managers are afraid of you. Your developers are afraid of you. Your managers are also afraid of the developers. Because they're stuck in the middle. They're not going to give you an honest answer. Now, the important thing to remember, especially as it relates to the developer-type people, yeah, how many of you were nerds in school? Boing, 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 everybody. Like, I was picked on as a kid, and I learned to read the people that were picking on me. Like, what do you want from me? You're making me nervous. I don't like it. So you read their mind. You know what they want to hear as they're picking on you, and you tell it to them, right? Just don't hit me. I would like to keep my underwear where it's supposed to be. Okay? Now, this same thing, we learned this early, and it's hardwired. There is no firmware change that's going to happen that's going to let us not be this way. We're nerds for life, kids. Now, we take these same skills into software development. So when your boss comes and yells at you, you go right into Dilbert mode. It's like, yeah, it's going awesome, because that's what they want to hear. But it's wrong. So you want to make sure that you embrace the fact that that's the culture that you're working in. Software developers are nerds. We've been picked on. We've been abused. This is something to keep in mind. So don't freak them out, because they're just going to lie to you. Okay? Remember this right there. That's what's going on. Okay, so you need to try to create trust inside your organization. So I know we're developers mostly here. Help your managers understand this. You have to sort of coach them through the process. You're the only person that you can change. Try to change what's going on in your life. Try to see what you can do about the culture of fear. So you need to find a way to make it okay to be wrong in your organization. Okay? This is one of those things like you take your best guess, and if you're wrong, that's okay, we just adjust. As opposed to, you're wrong, you're fired. Okay? Because a lot of us don't like to be fired, because as nerds, we're afraid of change. Sound familiar? I don't like new things. No, thanks very much. So if you're a manager, you need to make it okay for your teams to tell you that you are wrong as well. Because developers, testers, how often do your managers come in and they're just asking you for something that is absolutely bonkers? All the time. All the time. Managers, executives, you are asking for bonkers stuff all the time. Managers and executives, you also change your mind constantly. That is not good for productivity. Okay? So one of the problems that you can run into on a team is something called too much consensus. Now, Dov Froman wrote this book, Leadership the Hard Way, and he's got this great quote. The goal of a leader should be to maximize resistance in the sense of encouraging disagreement and dissent. And then go forward a little bit more, and he says, if you aren't even aware that the people in your organization disagree with you, then you are in trouble. That is the too much consensus problem. Okay? So you need to know that the people who are doing the work know more about doing that work than you do. If you're a manager or an executive, you know about strategy. They know about actually making it work. Okay? So let them disagree with you, and you are going to get a better product. Collaborate. Number 4, avoid earned value. So how many of you have seen this? It's like, how are you doing on that task? I'm about 72.6% done. And no one ever asks you how you arrived at that number, right? It's just like, moink, 72.6%, who knew? Okay, that is called earned value. You want to avoid it very badly. And here's another quote by another leading project management expert. Earned value is the path to the dark side. Earned value leads to technical debt. Technical debt leads to maintainability problems. Maintainability problems leads to suffering. Okay? This is true. Lots and lots of you raised your hands about technical debt. All that stuff is making your applications really hard to maintain. Now, there's this interesting line, too, in software. So if you've got $1 million to maintain your product, that's the whole budget, $1 million and you not a penny more to run your application or whatever. So in the beginning, it's mostly spent on new features. And then over time, it starts to be more like we're spending more and more on maintenance. And then at some point, you start coming dangerously close to your entire budget is on maintenance. That is maintainability problems. And at some point, you can cross that line, and it's now costing you more money to own your product than you actually comfortably can do. And that gets you into this place where it's time to rewrite your application, right? And that's a whole other pile of scary. Rewrite. How many of you worked on a rewrite project? Was it awful? Yeah, because especially the executives, managers in the room, rewrite projects are especially dangerous because you fool yourself into thinking that you understand what you're doing. You don't. So what you want to do is you want to try to keep yourself as far under that line of maximum maintenance versus budget for as long as you can. And one of the ways that you can do that to maximize your ROI is to drive out technical debt. The more technical debt you get rid of, the more time you have to work on developing new features or changing stuff to better meet the needs of the business. That technical debt is hidden. It's hidden and it's pure evil. And you need to work on it. So focus on your definition of done. Oh, that's what I was going to say. So in software, it either meets your definition of done or it doesn't. If it's not done software, you can't say it's done. Is it done or is it done? Right? How many of you have said that to your teams? You want to focus on it's just done. There's no such thing as done. It's like if someone says done, it's like time to put a quarter in the swear jar. Okay? And also, if you don't write unit tests, do that. How many of you write unit tests? Okay, the rest of you need to. It's going to help you with your technical debt and your maintainability problems. All right, number 5, avoid keeping 2 sets of books. So a shared reality is absolutely essential inside of Scrum under a Waterfall. So you've got this problem of the 2 different sides think and communicate in completely different terms. Start dates and deliverables and phases on one side, and the other side we've got free-for-all. Yay, party. Not exactly. We've got a backlog with a priority. We work in priority order. We know what we're doing for the next 30 days. We've got a vague idea what we're going to do the next sprint. Vague idea, next sprint. But we're just assuming that we're going to change all the time. We're going to measure ourselves, and we're going to have story points and know what our velocity is, and we're not going to tell you dates. Well, that becomes kind of a problem because, well, in Scrum under a Waterfall, you kind of have to, you got to throw those Waterfall people a bone sometimes. We all know that we run the world, right? Software makes the world go round. Managers sign our checks. Okay? So you got to throw them a bone. You have to work with them. So a tip here, and how many of you are on Team Foundation server? Oh, that's what I like to see. It'd be scary. It's like, GitHub. Oh. SVN. Oh, no. Okay. So one way to avoid the 2 sets of books is to use the integration between Microsoft Project Server and TFS. So is anyone using that right now? 1. This is probably a room of like 200 people. Okay, we got 2 people. All right, cool. So this will not be reviewed. So TFS and Visual Studio, it's that one place that your developers can go to for managing everything they do. So project planning on the Agile side, Scrum side, it's all in there. Great tools for doing Scrum planning. You've got source control, which integrates with the project plan. You've got automated builds, which integrates with both of those. You've got automated QA testing stuff in there. All these things go in there. Okay? helps you track bugs against releases and against builds and all this kind of stuff. So we've got a really good way of managing our work. But it's a little bit, it's pretty Agile-centric, which is not a bad thing unless you work in a Scrum under Waterfall environment. Then you've got Project Server. Project Server is enterprise project management. So if you like Microsoft Project, you're going to love Microsoft Project Server. Okay? So you've got tasks, you've got portfolios of projects. So it's not just one initiative, it's a bunch of initiatives that all roll up. Okay? You've got timesheets, resources, approvals, all that kind of stuff. And it's a plug into SharePoint, and you've got a web interface, and it's got an integration with Microsoft Project. It's actually pretty cool. And then there is a synchronization between TFS and Project Server. And it's a bidirectional sync. So you can make edits over here, they show up in Microsoft Project Server. You make changes in Project Server, they show up in TFS. Now, that's one set of books now. Okay? So you're not, futzing around with, okay, well, this means that, and this means that, and, shuffling a bunch of papers around and copying and pasting values in Excel spreadsheets. No. It goes into TFS, and that's the rule. It goes into Project Server, and that's the rule. And they just sync up. Okay? So everyone's talking the same language. We're not getting into that Dilbert zone of, how's everything going? Steaming pile of failure. Okay? Now, let's see. I'm going to pass that. So the big win here is that both sides stay in their own tools. So if you're comfortable in TFS and Visual Studio and all that stuff, you stay there. You don't have to worry about it. Someone sets up the mapping between your team project and the enterprise project plan and Microsoft Project Server, and everything else is taken care of. If you're a project planning crazy person, then you've got that. Work in Microsoft Project. And that big win is that the synchronization just happens. You don't have to think about it, it's just done. So, this is the important thing. Both of these things capture just the facts. They capture the real, honest data about what is going on. Okay? So if it's not in TFS, it doesn't exist. All right? If you record some date or some number, that's the real date. We're not going to keep, an extra set of books just to, juke the stats to make our burn down chart look good. It's going to go in there, and that's going to be reality, because we're trying to create a culture of honesty. Right? Honest is good. Can we generally agree that honesty is okay and it's actually a positive? Okay. So TFS, we've got source control. We've got the other thing of, does the build work? So I would say one of the things in your definition of done is that your code compiles as part of an automated build. If it doesn't compile as part of an automated build, it's not considered done. So that becomes very yes or no. Is it building properly right now? If it doesn't build, if the build doesn't pass, it's broken. So that's one way to keep you honest. Did the unit test pass? Because you're writing unit tests, right? And you're running the unit test as part of the automated build. So if the build compiles but the unit tests fail, it's broken. Consider it broken. Bug count. So if you got bugs, you have that in there. How much time is on a work item? What's the history on that stuff? It's all captured without judgment, and it's all published to Project Server without judgment. So it's all about being honest. There's something magical about typing it into some computer and be like, well, TFS, I am way behind. Save. It feels good. And it goes off to Project Server, and they're like, ah! But now you're not lying to anybody. So everyone's executing off of real information as opposed to bogus. All right, I think it's time to do a little demo. What do you think? Actually, does anyone have any questions before I get into the demo? Awesome. I'm going to keep going. How many of you are stone cold bored? Who's not paying attention? All right. Let's see if I can remember how to do this. And then now you can see iTunes, not what I was looking for. All right, so I'm going to remote desktop into my machine here. Or not. I love that dead silence moment. It's like when demos start to go bad. Speaking of panic, no. How many of you bought a a Surface this week? All right, everybody. Anyone wait longer than 2 hours? Anyone wait longer than 3 hours? Whew. I lucked out. I went yesterday, and it was only about 50 minutes. I felt like I had won the lottery. All right. Well, why is this turned off? Let's try this again. Sure no one has any questions? Yes. Can you go to the mic? I guess it's not on.
Well, you can hear me.
There you go.
Okay. So you may address this, but we're currently looking at applying Project Server over top of our Scrum process with the Scrum 2.0 process template.
Yep.
Project Server, of course, is going to require the original estimate to be captured and the time spent on the items, whereas the Scrum process only tracks the time remaining.
Yep.
So what are the real implications of that? Is that going to force us to fill out all that data on everything, or project is broken? Or is there a way to still use project even in the absence of that information?
So because that original estimate and the amount of hours you've actually burned is not there, you're sort of running into issues with the Scrum template?
Well, we haven't run into these issues yet, but I'm wondering what's going to happen to us. Is that going to force us to fill that out and track that everywhere for project to be useful? Or what if we don't fill that out, or if it's not accurate, then what value does project add at that point?
Actually, if you don't record how many hours you've spent, I don't think that's necessarily a problem, unless the people on the project side of the house really want to see that information. So if that field is not available to you, like one of the things that you could do is, instead of going and using the Scrum template, use the Agile template.
We can't change the template. We're going to have to, Project Server requires those two fields, so we have to add them to the Scrum process template.
Yep.
That we already have in use. So that's kind of where we are, but I wasn't sure if project would still work without all that being...
I think it's going to work just fine.
Okay.
So, any other questions while I'm logging into my stuff? Yeah, in the back.
By the way, I am a manager.
Oh, thank you very much. Everyone, hi, manager. This will be like an AA meeting or something.
So, not everybody works has the luxury of just being able to dedicate people just to a project. So how do sprints work with where you're balancing project work with just enhancements, regular enhancements that need to be addressed?
So where's the breakdown for you? Like, what's the hang-up in your mind about doing long-term maintenance stuff versus new feature development?
Well, it's you're competing against that executive deadline that you need to complete.
Yep.
And the problem is some of these projects are long-term, right? So in the meantime, there's additional work that needs to get done, and that's the challenge.
Yep. So one of the ways that I would think about that, let's assume just purely a Scrum team, is that the maintenance work would be taken care of and planned and tracked just like everything else. So you'd prioritize the maintenance work along with the new feature development, and at the end of that sprint, you're going to know what your velocity is. So your velocity is an indication of a measurement of how much done software you're delivering. So if you plan the maintenance along with the new feature development, your velocity number starts to show you the mix of what your reality is. So then in the future, you're going to plan using that velocity. So, well, in the past, historically, we've delivered X amount of work. So basically, in the future, we're probably going to deliver something like that. And you're going to use that number, the information of what you've actually done, to help figure out where you're going to be project plan-wise in the future. Does that sound like an answer? Okay. Middle.
Actually, my question follows that gentleman's. And not everybody is a software development house. We have a small team that works internally, so we have about 7 developers and about 10 business analysts, project managers. And we have the same problem, is that I don't know how we can ever set up a repeatable cadence of sprints, because our project teams are like 1 developer, 1 BA, QA, PM person,
Yep.
and then that developer could end up working on a bug in production on a completely different system tomorrow because it's impacting the business today.
Yep.
And then the sprint's gone. Or, what
Sure.
do you do?
Well, actually, what you're describing is exactly what velocity inside of a project does for you. So if you have a sprint where you've ordinarily been delivering, let's say, 25 story points worth of feature, and then something like that happens, and it's just like, the world is on fire. Now you only deliver 12 story points worth of done software. Well, that goes into your average story point value, and eventually it evens out, where you start to become really honest, and it's like, okay, well, sometimes the world tends to blow up, so our rosy estimate of, yes, we can conquer the universe, it's like, oh yeah, except for production issues, which hang us up. So over the course of a handful of sprints, your ability to forecast what you do gets better and better because you're recording what you've actually done. Once again, focus on done software, so you know what it takes to get to done. You're always comparing the same apples to apples as far as delivery goes.
Thanks.
And the last one, and then demo time.
This one actually follows on off of that. We're not a software shop. Our company makes paint. Our customers are internal customers, and we make software to help them do that.
Yep.
When they come to us with money to say, make us software, that is their commitment. They really don't have the time or the interest in participating in the project and providing feedback and so on. What are some approaches you can use to get them more involved?
Sure. Well, so historically, when you work the way you work right now, are they just like high-fiving you endlessly when you deliver your software? No. That's because they've never looked at it before, and you're doing your best to read their mind. Like, we've all seen that cartoon with the rope swing and the tire, right? Where it's like, what the BA said, what the customer said they needed, what this da-da-da, what the developers actually built, and it's like completely different every single time. So one of the things I might do is I might start talking to them and say, okay, well, remember in the past where we did that last project and, well, we got to the end and you're like, you really hated how this worked, and then it took us 3 weeks or 6 months or whatever to fix that? It's like, it would really do us a solid if you could take a look at this software earlier. Just give it a couple eyeballs. You don't need tons of time. Just tell us what you think before we've built the whole thing top to bottom. Because it's a lot cheaper to fix stuff early than it is to fix it later. So that's how I do it. And so I haven't mentioned this so far, but one of the important things when you're talking to the people above you in your org structure, the higher you go, the more likely they are to think about dollars and cents. So if you can get them, your executives, to give you 5 minutes of eyeball time on the software they're asking for, that might save them $50,000 of rework later on. So if you say it's going to save you money if you can give me 5 to 10 minutes of your time a couple times a week, I think that they'll start to listen. So that's one of the things that software developers tend to do. We tend to forget why we're building the software. We tend to think that we're there to build beautiful software for the sake of the beautiful software. And that's not really true. We're there to build software to help someone else make money, right? Unless you work for a nonprofit, in which case you're there to write software to help save the world. Okay? But either way, it's just a different currency. You're saying, okay, well, we can save more of the world if you look at the software. So you need to sort of get out of your own head of it's all about beautiful software, and now it's all about fit for purpose and helping them meet their goals. We are there to meet the goals of our bosses and of our companies. Okay? How's that for an answer? Good? All right. I always hate that when I answer something and then someone goes, nah, that was clever, but that was BS. All right. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to demo the sort of project manager-y type person coming up with a requirement, sending it off to the Agile team, and then getting it back. So here, I'm going to log in as a project manager, and I'm going to come into Microsoft Project. I'm going to open up an enterprise project plan. And Zoom It is running. So the enterprise project plan is it's the server-side version of what's going on Microsoft Project-wise. And because I have a room full of people staring at me, it's going to be super extra slow. I have awesome hardware that I'm running, 16 gigs of memory, 8 cores or whatever it is. It's pretty good, and yet it's still not fast. Next question. Yes.
So, what if we're required to provide a project cost at the beginning of
Next question. All right. What are you? Oh God, I really don't want to answer that. That's like you just like came in with a jackhammer and very quietly like jackhammered a gigantic hole in the ground, lined it with sharp sticks, and then like I don't know, I love champagne and cured meats. Put champagne and cured meats at the bottom, and you're like, here, jump into that. Can we talk about that afterwards? Because that's going to take 400 years. Okay. All right, so I'm in Microsoft Project, and I'm going to open up our e-commerce site project plan. And I am a project manager at this time, so I'm like, anything that I think of and dream of is golden, and I'm going to make the team do it. So I'm going to come in and make it real. So we're going to come in here, and let's add a new task. And let's call this task shopping cart. And we'll come over here and we'll assign it to Peter Thode. And then because we need to send this off to TFS, we've got this little column right here. Let's see if this will actually draw. Publish to team project. So if we set that column value to yes, and give it a work item type, it's going to get sent back over to Team Foundation Server. Now this gets taken care of and synced by the project server to TFS mapping. So we'll set it to yes. And this is actually mapped to a CMMI project, not an Agile project, but don't worry too hard about that. Okay, so we've gone and done that, and we think it's going to be 8 hours because we don't want them to take more than 8 hours on the shopping cart. So let's check out this project. We'll save it. We'll go to File and publish it back to the project server. Oops, let's come back over here. Publish. Now it's pushing this data back up to the server, at which point it will be visible to the synchronization between TFS and project server. So that's done. We'll close the project plan, check it in, and we're off and running. All right, so now we're going to come back and let's turn around and let's go look at this as someone on the dev team. So this is Peter. He comes in here, and he's going to launch Visual Studio. And he's going to go over to Team Explorer, and he's going to connect to the e-commerce site. And then he's going to go look at work items and look at the work breakdown query. So at this point, it should have, I'm hoping, maybe it hasn't synced yet. Oh, come on. All right. In my defense, the synchronization can take about 30 seconds to a minute. So I am such an awesome presenter that I went faster than Team Foundation Server can actually go. How's that? Round of applause for me for being awesome. All right, thank you. All right, let's hit refresh, and hopefully I don't sweat to death. Come on, TFS. Don't do this to me. It's project. Yeah, well, okay, here it is. It showed up. See, it actually does work. Actually, it's funny. Someone said blue screen a second ago. Did you know about how I did this talk at TechEd last year? Okay. Last year at TechEd, I started having hard drive failures on my laptop. I was on stage like I am right now doing these demos. Blue screen up on the giant screens. It was awesome. And someone whipped out their phone, took a picture, and tweeted it along with what I said right after it, which was, no, 20 minutes to fill with no demos. That shouldn't be a problem. It's still, I think if you look at me on Twitter under the favorite tweets, it's still up there. There's a picture. It's awesome. You should go look at it, retweet it away. It's like terror on my part. All right. So we've got this task, and we're going to come in here and let's add a new linked work item, and let's decompose what we're doing. So we were sent a requirement, and the project management people are saying, all right, tell me what it's going to take to make this real. So we're going to come in here. We're going to add a link type of child, making it a child task, and we're going to give it work item type of task. And let's see, what are we going to call this? Let's call it UI dialog. And we'll come in here and let's say that this is 40 hours. 40 hours of remaining work. That looks pretty good. And yeah, it looks all right. Click Save. And Visual Studio is not responding. Perfect. This is really disconcerting when you have like the sound of the universe crashing behind you. Like yesterday, I was in another room doing my SharePoint testing talk, and it was just like highways. It was like there was a motorcycle rally right outside the window. And also, like the sun was beating on these like dark curtains that you couldn't see it, but it was like 500 degrees. It was like the sun was right behind me. Come on, I'm telling jokes, and Visual Studio is still taking its sweet time. Next question. Yes.
We have a lot of different stakeholders, and they'll ask for projects like, say, on a web page, they want to change some minor functionality, switch some things around, not necessarily just text changes, but almost to that degree.
Okay.
How do we, and in their mind, it's like, hey, this is something that shouldn't take very long. We can get it out today. How do we get them to get into a process of understanding that's going to have to wait till the next sprint, and and getting them into that sprint mindset?
So basically, how do you say no without saying no?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, you need to start talking to them about definition of done, and also start talking to them about historically what you've actually been able to deliver. And that's why it's important to capture, like, okay, this is what we think we're going to do inside of a sprint. Did we do it or not? Did it get all the way to definition of done or not? And you're going to record how much work you do, and you're going to use the estimates you've come up with in the past to help estimate relative size of work in the future. And you're just going to get into this thing of saying, look, historically, we've never been able to deliver that much work. It's going to fall outside the next sprint. So we, in good conscience, cannot lie to you and say that we're going to do this unless you change the priority. Help us flip stuff around so that this thing that you want is higher priority than the other stuff that we were already thinking of doing. But you get into this conversation about priority, like what's more important to you? How much resources do we actually have? And that's how you do it. So you don't say no, you just say, okay, well, we have to adjust our priority some. Okay? All right, so this looks like it's saved. So we'll come back over here, and let's go back into project as our project server, project plan person. Open that back up again. Hopefully it'll go a little faster. Or actually, I'm going to do the web app for this. So we'll go into the website for Microsoft Project Server. Now, if you're the kind of project planner that wants to approve everything, this is kind of one of those places you're going to want to do that. Okay? So Project Server's integration will let you know when there are things that are changed so that you can sort of approve it. So it makes you feel like you're in control. Okay? So we've got an approval pending. So we click on this. we see that something has changed. So part of this, if you're this kind of project manager, is that you want to know, okay, well, what's happening all the time? I don't want my team pulling the wool over my eyes and saying that everything's doing just fine when it's not. Okay? This is super fast. Next question. Keep them coming. Go.
I'm a former developer who became a manager who became an executive.
Okay.
So
we still love you. Thank you.
Yeah, well,
thank you for the
yeah,
jobs.
My question, I have really two parts. The first thing really goes back to when I was a developer, I always had that kind of I'm never going to say no attitude. We're going to will it into existence.
Which is why you're an executive, not a developer anymore. Like, I'm not joking. Like, there is a mindset difference, and that's
Right.
where you've risen in your career.
Right. So when I try to communicate with my team,
Yep.
I expect them to be that way.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and how do I get them to adopt more of that?
More of
that
a can-do
type of
attitude?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Just less negative, more positive. You know, and
Is there any theme to what they're negative about?
it mostly has to do with schedule or
Yeah.
or just
This is what your team is thinking when you talk to them.
so yeah, it mostly has to do with schedule, or if we don't necessarily have to see the whole path
Yes.
to believe that we can get there.
Yes.
And I don't want to hear a bunch of negative. I want to hear we'll figure it out together.
Right.
Right.
Well, so what I would do, and this might be uncomfortable for you in the immediate term, is you have to work with them more and put your developer hat back on a little bit, get in the mindset of what they're thinking about, and help collaborate. When they say no, it's say, okay, well, how can we cut the scope so we can get it in this window?
Right.
Why are you thinking that it's that way? And you probably have you're probably reasonably technical still.
Right.
So when they say something that's crazy, you say, well, we don't have to build it that way. We don't need a gold-plated rocket ship to 7-Eleven.
Right.
You start talking about what's fit for purpose for the business, because developers also are tending to think that we have to build something that is like NASA quality, it's going to Mars. When in your mind, you're like, I have a business opportunity that is only going to have a window of this long.
Right.
Get it out the door.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct.
Yep.
And I typically don't really care about elegance of code.
Yeah.
And I didn't then
Yep.
either. You know,
Another reason why he's a manager. Exactly. So I think you're onto something. And we can talk more about this afterwards,
Okay.
but I think you need to collaborate more with your people and help them know that. Say that I care about maintainability. I want unit tests. You want unit tests, by the way.
Right.
I want unit tests that are going to make it more maintainable. The unit tests are there because they're going to help you to make refactoring a lot less painful than it is right now. And that means you can change your mind a lot more often.
All right.
So
thanks.
try that. All right, so coming back over here, we've got a status update that came through. If we click on that, it's going to come up. And don't worry, you can ask as many questions as you want after this is over. We'll go outside and we can talk forever. Come in here and we'll say, yep, this looks good. Highlight it, hit accept, give a little note, yep. And there we go. We know what's going on inside of our approval process. We are up to date on this. Okay. Now, unfortunately, I'm a little bit out of time on some of the other demos, but basically, you see what we're talking about. We see this power of you can go from either direction. So you can start in Microsoft Project and start with requirements and push it back into your Agile teams and say, decompose it, give me estimates, it'll update the dates and all this kind of stuff for you. Or you can go the other direction. You can say, okay, if I'm the project management office, I just want you to keep me up to date. Be as agile as you want, create all your requirements in TFS and the Agile side, decompose them if you want to, but just use Microsoft Project here to publish it in so I can see what's going on. Okay? So just hopping over here and we'll wrap up. Or not. What is going on? Oh, wrong machine. I'm good at this. All right, so we went through, we did some approvals. But we've got transparency and honesty because we have one set of books, which is crucial for making Scrum under Waterfall work. So that integration of Project Server and TFS is really important. So we've got our 5 tips here. Think positive. Just like the boss over here. Try to think positive. Try to think about what you gain as opposed to what you lose. Then also work with between the two constituencies to help get them to come to terms with uncertainty. And recognize that there's fear everywhere, especially managers and executives. Remember that your people were picked on. They're going to give you the answer you want to hear. Avoid the problem of too much consensus. Also avoid earned value. It's done or it's not done. Get a definition of done, write it down, and have everyone know what it is. So nothing is done until it meets the written definition of done. And then finally, you're going to avoid keeping 2 sets of books with TFS and Project Server. Handful of resources. So if you want to listen to a good intro about Clausewitz, this is oddly applicable to software development. So BBC Radio has a podcast called In Our Time. They do one a little ways back. It was really good. Also, Negotiating with Emotions by Kimberlin Leary. This was in HBR very recently. So there's a lot of emotion that happens on both those sides of the negotiation process. This is kind of an interesting article for just sort of thinking about what does that actually look like. Another one is Yes to the Mess, Surprising Leadership Lessons from Jazz. I'm a former jazz musician, so this is especially interesting to me. This is a lot about letting go as a leader or as a software professional even. It's not really talking about software, but they're talking about business, and just sort of embracing the fact that change is happening. This book might actually help break that logjam. Another one is The Generals by Thomas Ricks. So they talk a lot about leadership style in the Army in various wars in the last 100 years or so. This also has a lot about communication. And what I think is really important is about failure. So how people deal with failure is really important. That's really super applicable to software because we fail on a regular basis, and we need to figure out a way to make that okay. We just have to be honest about it. So that's another great book. And then in summary, Scrum under Waterfall can be awkward. Try to get trust. Use Agile to detect problems and keep yourself honest. Project Server and TFS. And then remember transparency. So on that note, no more last questions. We'll talk offline. And thank you very much.